know, takes videos of all of these lectures. He took the one of Ambassador Yehuda Avner, who I want to greet, who's here tonight, one of our special guests when he spoke about his book, The Prime Ministers. The videos are available at the office. All we ask you to do is to make a contribution to the dinners for the lone soldiers. The following week, a number of books that have received a lot of attention in the Jewish community. One was a finalist in the Jewish Book Award. Her book will be available tonight. It's a marvelous book, In the Narrow Places. It deals with the 3 weeks, which are coming up very soon. A critical period in Jewish life leading up to Tisha B'Av, the destruction of both the first and the second temple, and a time for contemplation and modification of one's life. The thoughts in it are beautiful. The book will be sold tonight at a discount following the speaker's talk. She'll be happy to sign the book and autograph it for you. It's a book that should be on every Jewish home bookshelf. The speaker has asked that I do her a special favor and not make an extended introduction. She asked me that I shouldn't tell you that she graduated Yeshiva University, Harvard, the London School of something or other, and a whole bunch of other places. That I shouldn't tell you about all the books she's written, how well they've been received. She also asked me not to tell you about the prizes she's won. And I think because you'll come to the conclusion yourself when you hear her talk. She's agreed to do a Q&A, questions and answers, at the end of the program, so I need to make that one comment. Our speaker tonight is Dr. Erica Brown. No other speakers. If you have a question, state the question clearly, concisely, no lectures. A microphone will be brought around so that you can talk into the microphone and she will respond. But if you start lecturing, I'll have to cut you off. So please observe that ritual. It's with great pleasure, because I've been looking forward to this for well over a year, to get her here from Washington, D.C., and from, what's the other place near Washington? Baltimore. Silver Springs. And we have the pleasure of listening tonight to Dr. Erica Brown.
Thank you, Asher, and I'd like to thank my friends my new friends at Koren. I also want to acknowledge how lovely it is to be here in Yerushalayim and to be in the presence of so many beloved friends, my mother, my in-laws, and other relatives. So thanks for coming to my bat mitzvah. Actually, 23 years ago, 1 month from today, I was married in this hall, so it's also kind of special to be here. But unfortunately, we're going to talk about a topic that is a difficult subject, a controversial subject, and something that we really need to be spending a little more time talking about at our Shabbat tables and our Batei Midrash, and that is the topic of Jewish leadership. And what does it mean to speak about Jewish leadership in crisis? So what I want to start off with is actually a little bit on the Parsha. This week, we'll read Parshat Bamidbar. And there's always that lovely emotional feeling that you have when you finish a Sefer, Vayikra, and we say Chazak, Chazak, V'nit Chazek, and we're all kind of in that moment together, celebrating the accomplishment of finishing a book of Chumash. And then we get to Sefer Bamidbar, and we notice that after 10 chapters of a tightly organized structure, the camp is organized in a particular way. There's a census. There's the question of where the Machane rests, where the Mishkan rests, and how the Machane is established, with various tribes taking their position, and who's responsible for moving the Machane, and who's responsible for setting up the Machane. And Digalim, it's all like setting up a summer camp, right? All the ingredients of setting up life in a strange place. And then something happens. Bible scholars, divide this Sefer into 3 divisions. Generally, the divisions go as follows: 1 to 10, then chapters 11 to 25, then 26 to 36. So you can pay attention to this in Shul, the Shabbat. What happens between 10 and 11? In chapter 11, just talked about the highly organized structure of this Sefer, and then we get to chapter Yud Aleph, 11, and everything falls apart. The people begin to complain. God sends a fire in the encampment. Then the people complain that they don't have meat. But they don't actually complain that they don't have meat. If you read the text carefully, it says, Mi achilenu basar. Who will give us meat? What kind of leader can really deliver what we want right now? Moshe is so distraught by this. He goes from family to family. He hears them each crying, each one in his ohel. And Moshe says, they want me to be an omein, a nursing father to them. The political theorist Aaron Vildovsky wrote a book, Moses the Nursing Father. The whole idea of him saying, they don't want meat. Do you know what they actually want? They want milk. They want me to be a total parent to them. They want to be totally dependent, and I cannot deliver. And Moshe has his, to use kind of a metaphor from Styron, he slips into darkness in the sense that he says, for the first and only time, God, take my life. Take my life. I can't do this job. Now, I know a lot of people in leadership positions, they don't quite say that, but it's not too far. And the Perek actually reminds us of the culture of leadership. So I want to begin with a question for you, and we'll try to answer it as our time together evolves. What happens between chapter 10, 1 and 10, where everything is neatly structured, and then we get to 11, and everything starts falling apart? What happens? This is actually just in my son's yeshiva Malay Gilboa, and I was giving a shiur, and I was talking to them about this very thing. And one of them pointed out something interesting. I said, they go out, a mahalach shloshet yamim. They go out 3 days into the desert. And what do they realize 3 days into the desert? That all the leadership structures that they've created to be successful, not all of them are going to work. We take a leadership position professionally or in a volunteer capacity. We set up a board. We set up ideas. We have a strategic plan. And then life starts. And guess what? Life does not work like the writing of a strategic plan. It's simply not like that. We enter the midbar. We enter the wilderness. And the wilderness is uncharted territory by its very definition. And that means that no matter how well we prepare, we can never be sufficiently prepared. So they go 3 days into the journey, and they begin to complain. Now this, by the way, echoes something that we experience in Shmot Tetvav. They enter the desert 3 days right after the water has split, and they begin to complain. So you can say, oh, what complainers? They're just saved by water, they complain about water. But I don't know how you would feel 3 days into the desert about your leadership if you felt that you lost your way, if you felt that you didn't have the provision that you needed. So it's interesting, and I think it comes out actually in two words. When we set up the camp, we care about the center of the camp. What is the center of the camp? It's the center. You don't think I'm doing all the work, do you? The center of the camp is the Mishkan, right? The Mishkan is the center of the camp, and everything's around the camp. Where does the complaining begin? If you look in Yud Aleph, it says, "B'ktzei hamachaneh," in the margins of the camp, the periphery of the camp. You know, it's so great when you're in the center and everything is working and you are the center of attention and you understand how everything works because you're an insider. But guess what? Not everyone has those feelings. There are people who are on the outside of the camp who want something from their leaders and their leaders don't deliver, and they begin to complain, and it starts to impact on the center. So what I want to understand this evening is the culture of leadership that happens, that we're in right now, that impacts our leadership. And I'm going to point to 3 specific areas where I think that our leadership needs help. But constantly thinking about this within the framework of the Merkaz and the Ktsei. What does it mean to be in the center? What does it mean to be on the periphery? Because sometimes the people in the center don't actually see what's really going on. And sometimes the people on the Ktsei, on the extremities of the camp, on the Shulayim, on the peripheria, as they say in Hebrew, don't really understand what it takes to lead. And things fall apart. We organize, and then we confront nature. And I say that because I've done a lot of work in landscape architecture and studies on the impact of outside spaces on internal problems. And there's a lot of writing on this. I'm happy to direct you to William Conan's book and others, that we tend to think of nature as something that we can manage. And so you'll go to a safari park, and everything there is created for you. I've been to Kenya, and in Kenya, believe it or not, they do script where the animals go and where the jeeps go to see the animals, and you think you're in the wild, but guess what? You don't know anything about wilderness. Werner Herzog, the filmmaker, made a film. I want to recommend it, and I don't want to recommend it, so just if you're watching it, don't eat lunch. Werner Herzog made a film called Grizzly Man. What happens in Grizzly Man? Young man, this is not a fiction, this is true. Young man drops out of school. He's a failed actor in California. He's a blonde. I don't know if that's significant. I felt I needed to tell you that. And he decides that he's going to Alaska, and he's going to work with a group of bears in Alaska. And he's going to train these bears, like he's almost like he's running his own nature show. And he goes for 13 summers to Alaska, and he takes 1,000 hours of footage of him relating to nature. And one summer, his 13th summer, he and his girlfriend get eaten by the bears, which unfortunately was also captured on film, but he's not in the movie. Why do I say that? Because it typifies what Herzog tries to do, is look at the naivete of a person who thinks that he has power over nature. And what happens to Bnei Israel? We organize ourselves and we enter chaos, and everything about nature is pushing against us. So if you read the novelist Amitav Ghosh, wrote a wonderful book, The Glass Palace, about rubber tree forests in Burma that the English were planting. And he talks about what it's like to create something in nature that's artificial and have all of nature pushing back on you all the time. Do you ever garden, right? And you have to take out the weeds. But you can't take out the weeds once. You have to go every day and take them out. Or did you ever look at your kid's closet, right? You clean the closet, it looks like the Gap for 5 minutes, and then it all starts again, because it requires a certain type of vigilance. And we look at Sefer Bamidbar, and we talk about the vigilance of leadership, because it's not enough to organize something. You have to be able, as we call it contingency theory in leadership, to lead in chaos. Because if you can't lead in chaos, you simply can't lead. So I want to describe, since we began with the culture of the Midbar that precipitated a breakdown of leadership. And if I renamed this Sefer, I would probably call or subtitled it Bamidbar, the breakdown of leadership. And I invite you to look at virtually every narrative here is some form of rebellion. Whether it's Korah, whether it's the Meraglim, whether it's Bilam and Balak, whether it's Miriam and Aaron speaking about their brother, there's some questioning of authority, and there's a breakdown of the impact of leadership. So where are we today? Where are we today? That takes us to another story. A story in Shoftim Tet, and that is the Mashal of Yotam. So you know the people in Sefer Shoftim went from leader to leader, mostly unsuccessful leaders. We have some narratives are a paragraph, some are a few verses, some are a few chapters, and we keep moving on. Avimelech gets positioned as a leader. Yotam, I'll give you all the context, but Yotam disagrees with this. He takes all the people together and he gives them a mashal Yotam, the parable of Yotam. And it reads like a Dr. Seuss story. The trees want to appoint a leader, so they go to the olive tree. And they say, olive tree, lead for us, lead for us. And the olive tree says, why would I give up my shemen? Why would I give up something that I give out, that people really enjoy, to lead? Then they go to the fig tree. And they say, fig tree, lead us. And the fig tree says, why would I give up my sweet fruit for this job? Then they go to the vine. They go to the Geffen. And they say, Geffen, lead us. And the Geffen says, why would I lead you? Why would I give up my wine, which gladdens the heart of people, to do this job? What are they all actually implicitly saying about leadership?
It's a lousy job.
It's not for me, because I'm too good for it. I'm too good for it. Why would I give up something that I actually get something out of, that actually makes people happy, to take on a role which makes people miserable. If you ever want people not to like you, take a leadership role in your shul, your kid's school. Worse, politics. It's an instant way to ruin your reputation. So they basically all claim, why would I do this to myself? And then they invite the bramble, right? Remember those Roadrunner cartoons with the brambles, right? And they say bramble. The bramble volunteers to lead. The bramble is appointed. And the bramble says, sit under my shade, eat my fruit. And you go, you're a bramble. You have no roots, you have no shade, you have no fruit. Okay, you'll lead for us. So it's a very, very powerful mashal. You can turn to Perek Tet, chapter 9 of Shoftim, and read it yourselves because it's always impacted me. What is this? What is the culture, the climate in which we lead? And I'm going to give you 3 words that I think describe what we need right now as we unlock what it is that we're messed in right now. The first is sincerity, the second is civility, and the third is integrity. Those are the 3 things that I think have to characterize Jewish leadership, are the hallmark of Jewish leadership: sincerity, civility, and integrity. And I'm going to talk about why each of these is becoming increasingly problematic. On the sincerity front, we all listen to political speeches. Very few of us believe them. Why don't we believe them? You do believe them. You all believe them. It's just me? Why don't we believe them? All right, history has shown it. No more taxes. Remember that one? Right, that was a popular one. History has shown very often, and it's not even long-range history, sometimes in very short-term ways, we understand that people say things for what reason? To get elected. That didn't take much. It was a very responsive audience, right? To get elected. People say things because they want a position, and then when they're in position, they actually, for whatever reason, and we talk about how hard we make it to lead, they become stuck, and they're unable, or they lose the drive, or they lose the ambition, or they simply are in position already, and then it doesn't matter. We know that most of these speeches are not written by the people who say them. And I write a lot of speeches, so I know. So the idea that somehow we're counting on people to mean what they say, to say what they mean, and to say things, deliver words that will actually take us to another place, and they don't. And actually, if you're looking at leadership literature and patterns in leadership literature of late, there's a lot of work now going on in emotional intelligence and leadership. One of the key thinkers, Daniel Goleman, who's the pioneer in emotional intelligence studies, actually wrote a book. He co-authored a book called Primal Leadership at Harvard, and then 2 of his co-authors went on to write a book called Resonant Leadership. And they discuss the impact of emotional intelligence on leadership, the leader being emotionally in tune with his or her constituents. Part of that has to do with hope. Part of that has to do with the genuine feeling of optimism, that people are taking us somewhere and that we actually believe that they're going to take us somewhere. And what Goleman says, managing meaning for a group. When a leader is in a room, just think about it, the last time you were at work when this happened, you're at a staff meeting. You perceive who has real power in the room, and even when they're not saying anything, Goleman says, based on various studies, even when they're not saying anything, everyone tries to gauge what are they thinking, what is their response, particularly in an ambiguous situation, right? In that uncharted, that RFL, that fog we were talking about before, that chaos, they're looking at the leader and they're saying, I don't know really what to think, and I'm relying on you to help me determine what I should think, what I should do, how I should respond. And yet, sometimes, those leaders don't deliver. So managing meaning for the group. And so sincerity becomes an issue today because we believe that most people don't write what they say, and what they say is not actually going to come to fruition. That's a huge problem in leadership. It's so immense, I don't even know where to start with it. Certainly from a Jewish perspective, all of the halachot that we have about the way in which we speak, or I study Nachyomi, so now finishing Mishlei, so many proverbs about the use of the tongue and the abuse of the tongue. You can't escape it. So the sense that have we betrayed our own heritage in not speaking sincerely about what it is that we set out to do. Okay, the second one is civility. So civility is not hard to discuss, or incivility is not hard to discuss. We live in a very entitled culture. So you don't like something in a store, you take it back. This does not work in Israel, by the way. Don't try it. But in other places, you don't like something, you take it back. Well, guess what? Now people start doing that in Jewish organizations. They say, I don't like the class that my child is in. If you don't change that class, I'm taking my child out of this school. That's hijacking. That's not a civil conversation. That's saying, I need you to do it my way, and if you don't do it my way, then there are going to be consequences for your organization. Now, many organizations bend over backwards, particularly those in fundraising, which is basically everybody. They care about what donors think. And so a donor wants something, and we jump and we say, okay, we can make this happen for you. I've worked for 15 years for the Federation, and it's a philanthropic-based organization where we rely on donor support. No one wants to alienate a donor. But does that give a donor, a funder, a participant, a member, the right to speak to you in an uncivil way? It does not. And politics is filled with this now. So filled with it that people cannot listen to a political opinion that is not their own in a respectful fashion. They listen to talk radio, they read newspapers, they watch television channels that support their views, so that technically they don't ever have to hear something that doesn't agree with their opinion. Sociology, we have a term for this, it's called homophily. People love to find other people and attracted to other people who are like them. So you're sitting in a park with your kids, you say, what car do you drive? Oh, I drive the same car. Who do you vote for? I vote for the same person. Where do you live? I live on the same street. And you are shocked by this. It is not shocking. It's the way in which we affirm the decisions that we make is by being next to people who choose the things that we choose. It's a very validating experience. But guess what? From a civility perspective, it's a terrible experience for us. It means that we haven't created an environment in which we can speak respectfully and listen, more importantly, listen respectfully to someone else. And our leaders represent this. Our leaders, just as guilty as we are, our leaders are more guilty because they sustain this kind of culture. I want to read to you something which had a huge impact on me. It's a book that I read this year. It's really one of my favorite books on writing by the Israeli novelist David Grossman, who wrote a book called Writing in the Dark. And he wrote an essay called The Desire to be Gisela. And it's such a remarkable story. When he wrote his book, See Under Love, which I imagine many of you have read, wonderful book, he describes the fact that not long after he wrote the book, he's sitting on an Egged bus, and a reader, he listens to the radio, and a reader is reading excerpts from his book, right? So imagine you're sitting on the bus, must be a great feeling, you're sitting on the bus, and you hear that, the bus driver is reading a piece from your novel. Of course, the bus driver instantly turns it off, turns it to like a pop radio station, and he is now insulted because, he was getting into his own novel, and he feels like, how dare you insult me this way? But he catches something in the reading that doesn't make sense to him. He has a minor character named Gisela. She's sitting down at a sewing machine that has a special pedal made by her Uncle Shimmick. And Grossman is listening to this, and he is deeply disturbed because he cannot figure out why there's a special pedal on her sewing machine. He's just not the type of person to include a detail about a sewing machine. And he's so upset by this that he runs home and he opens up the book to check, and he has a moment of great happiness because he remembers why Gisela has a special pedal. Why? He says, I remember being filled with happiness because I had suddenly discovered something simple and profound about writing. He said if he had broken a blind at home or a door handle, his wife would remind him every few days, Jewish women are great at this, every few days to fix it. He would forget about it, and finally when everybody protested enough, he would take care of it. He said, but when I write a story and a short and stocky woman named Gisela walks around in the story, and when I write her, I become Gisela. So even if she's a marginal character, I am totally absorbed in her character, so much so that when I describe her sitting at a sewing machine, I understand that as a short woman, she needs a special pedal. And so he has this discovery about himself as a writer. And he says, I know full well that if I had not added that extra pedal, most of my readers would not have noticed its absence when they read the description of Gisela using the machine. Moreover, I myself Were I to read the excerpt after some time, I wouldn't think anything was missing. Why does he say this? Because he goes on to talk about the fact of how difficult it is for us to embody another person's opinion that is not our own. It's not only in writing, it's in politics, it's in life. He said that that moment gave him clarity on the human capacity to become the other, even if that other is just a fictional character. Wouldn't it be wonderful if in life we could actually leave the self and enter the other in that very specific and detailed way? So that's Glassman. And just a thought about civility, and perhaps a little hint at how to do this a little better than we're doing as leaders and as followers. There's a story about Rav Nachman. He's not the famous Rav Nachman. He's the other minor Rav Nachman. And this is told in a book called Seek My Face by Art Green. And he writes about Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman, the minor, has a shamash. Rav Nachman has a unique capacity, ability, that whenever he sees someone, he sees Yud He Vav He on their face. It's like the glasses that he wears. Yud He Vav He, and that becomes the filter. It's the filter that allows him to see that everyone is created in God's image. He doesn't make it in Rabbanos, never. And he goes into business. And he notices after a little while that he can't see the Yud He Vav He in people's faces anymore. And he becomes distraught. So he hires someone, a shamash. And the shamash's only job is every time he has an interaction with someone, he says, "Where's the Yud He Vav He?" Now that's a different kind of secretary. That's a different kind of personal assistant. It's the personal assistant that reminds us to be our best selves, because we're created in God's image. How could we not think that someone else is? And that has to really drive a lot of the way that leadership takes place, in terms of people modeling as leaders the civil way in which they have to interact with each other. And the last is integrity. And I feel very uncomfortable speaking about this. I wrote a book about it, Confronting Scandal. It was the hardest book to write. It was awful. It was awful to write about the former president and prime minister of Israel, convicted of crimes. It was awful to write about, I wasn't profiling individuals, but mentioning individuals that have taken us morally to a place that many of us never thought we would go. And to explain the full disgust with the level of scandal in the community and in our leadership, I want to just turn to the very nice poster behind us. One people, one Israel, one Jerusalem, great synagogue. Now, what's the overriding word here? One. What is the appeal of this? What is the appeal of it? Unity. What else? What else is the appeal of this? Responsibility. Responsibility one to the other. See, everybody who knows me feels responsible to answer my questions. So, we want to feel unity. We want to feel responsible for each other. What else? What? We help each other. Yes, someone in the back. We're unique. There's something one. There's something yachid, something different about us that distinguishes us. We're part of that oneness. There's a great appeal to the sense of membership and belonging, which isn't hard to understand if you're minority people, been persecuted through history. You want to feel that you are together, that you are one. Now, how is this best embodied? The Jewish nod. You know, I know this doesn't happen as much in Israel. If you go outside of Israel, you're in a supermarket line, and someone is wearing a Magen David. And you feel that you must communicate that you too are Jewish. Right? So, but you don't want to say, "Are you Jewish?" because that's so pastiche. So you go, right? There's like some little wink. It's like a little bodily thing. But there's something that I need. There's some way I need to indicate to you. Right? What's the most boring game in the universe? Jewish geography. Why do we play this game? It is not interesting if you have an aunt that I've never met in Silver Spring. I hate to tell you, it's just not interesting for me. Why do we play this game? And by the way, I heard everybody was playing it before I started. Why do we play this game? Because we want to be this. Because 6 degrees of separation is way too many for for us. We want 0.6 degrees of separation. So if I can talk to you enough, I can discover we're related by marriage. You know, I'm so happy. What difference does it make? I don't know. But there's some kind of psychic, we have a word for it. It's called peoplehood. It was only added to the Oxford English Dictionary in 1983. I have a word for it, peoplehood, this idea that we are psychically connected to each other. And I'll give you a great example. My husband is an emergency room physician. I had to get that in for my mother-in-law. And he, every once in a while, he's going to have a patient. And a patient will come in and see him wearing a kippah in the emergency room and say, "Shalom, doctor." Now, why does someone say, "Shalom, doctor"? Because what they're really saying is, I don't want to wait 4 hours in this emergency room. And you and me, we are one. So I get to skip the line, right? Because we think that being Jewish and being connected to someone else means that we're part of the psychic community, we're family, and if we're family, we privilege our family members. We treat them differently. Now it can be good, and it also can be horrible. And I'll tell you how it's horrible. If you feel proud that so many Nobel Prize winners are Jewish, or you feel proud because Jews win something in a Eurovision or the Olympics, then when you hear about Bernie Madoff, or you hear about Moshe Katsav, or you hear about Jack Abramoff, and the list goes on, you also realize they're also a member of my family. I might not be proud of everybody in my family, I might not be comfortable with everyone in my family, but they're part of my family. So if you think that we can ignore the issue of integrity in leadership, we can't, because this is our family. And when it comes to the reputation of the Jewish people, we're all stakeholders. I have to remember that we're all stakeholders. So I want to just talk a little bit about this. In working on the book on scandal, I thought a lot about the trajectory of power. How is it that someone, an Elliot Spitzer or Bernie Madoff, any of the characters that we just mentioned, I'm sure that not one of them began their finance career or their career in politics thinking it would end the way it ended. I don't think for 1 minute Moshe Katsav thought he'd be where he is today. What happens? Well, we have indications of what happens in our stories, in our biblical stories, in our narratives. We have an indication of what happens in the trajectory of power. And I want to give you what I think is the best example of this. The best example. The best example I know is in Melachim. It's in Melachim Aleph, Perak Kaf Aleph. And in Melachim Aleph, Kaf Aleph, you're welcome to look if you'd like to. We have the story of Achav. Now Achav wants a kerem. He wants a vineyard of Navot. Navot lives near him. Navot's kerem is near his palace, and he says he wants it. And I said, I'll give you the money for it, or I will give you an even better kerem, an even better vineyard for it. And Navot says no. And remember why he says no? It's a Yerusha. It's my father's. In other words, this is Nachalat Avot. I'm not giving up the Yerusha of my father. This belongs to my family. So Achav goes home and he has what we call the royal temper tantrum. He doesn't sleep. He turns his face away from the bed. He doesn't eat. And Izebel walks in. That's why you're so upset. He says, Achav says, I offered Navot money for this vineyard. Or I offered him a better vineyard. Of course, he doesn't say the reason that Navot refused. He says, and he wouldn't give it to me. And what does she say to him? Do you not govern the kingdom of Israel? What is she saying when she says that? If you want something, you can take it. You don't have to wait. If you want it, you can have it. And she says, I'll get it for you. And what does she do? She has false witnesses, Edei Sheker, testify that Navot blasphemed God, blasphemed the king, nothing could be further from the truth, has him stoned in the public square, and says to him, here's your vineyard. Now he has a choice at that point. What could he have said? Izebel, I read about you a few chapters ago, and I know that you are up to no good. And where did this vineyard come from, and what has happened? That's not what he does. He takes the vineyard. And then Eliyahu Hanavi comes and he has a few choice words for him. The point is that there are two enablers in this story, Achav and Izebel. Achav enables her by not calling her on her behavior, and Izebel enables him by telling him, if you have power, just do whatever you want. take the vineyard. It's yours for the taking. Of course, Shmuel warned us about power in chapter Chet, right? And he warned us early on, before we had a king. You know when you have a king, and he's going to have power, to be like everybody, and he's going to take your daughters to be embroiderers and perfumers, and he's going to take your sons, he's going to take your land, he's going to take your things. And you're going to come crying to me because of the power that he yields. Now, did we not say no cell phones? I think we said no cell phones. All right, I want to read to you something, because it's an astonishing comment about entitlement. I'm going to read to you a text of an apology, and let's see if you know who said this apology. I stopped living by the core values that I was taught to believe in. I knew my actions were wrong, but I convinced myself that normal rules didn't apply. I never thought about who I was hurting. Instead, I thought only about myself. I ran straight through the boundaries that a married couple should live by. I thought I could get away with whatever I wanted to. I felt I'd worked hard my entire life and deserved to enjoy all the temptations around me. I felt I was entitled. No, it was not that plain. Look, there are any number of people who could have said this. Let's face it.
Tiger Woods.
Tiger Woods. This is Tiger Woods. Tiger Woods' apology. And if any of you actually watched it, and you can watch it, the text actually is quite compelling. The way that he delivered it really was removed of the emotional intelligence we talked about. But what is he saying here when he's describing that trajectory to power? As I became more famous, as everybody around me said, whatever you want, Tiger. Yes, Tiger. You know how old he was, by the way, when he had his first golf club? 7 months old. 7 months old. By the time he was 19 and his first world championship, he had been on a professional golf course for 17 years. And you're going to blow that? And he did. Because he says, as I was becoming more powerful, no one stopped me. And that's the role of the enabler, and that's the relationship of the follower and the leader. One of the things that Daniel Goleman talks about that makes leadership, that creates a crisis in leadership, is when leaders don't get feedback. And what he says is the higher you rise, the more feedback you need, the less feedback you get. Why don't we give people in senior positions feedback? Because you're in on it. You're attached to that star. Why else? You don't want to be fired. Thank you. You don't want to be fired. You don't want to change the relationship. You want to stay within that ambit that really helps you be successful, helps you look like a star. Maybe you think that person won't listen to you. You know, they say one of the greatnesses of Lincoln's leadership was he surrounded himself with a cabinet who disagreed with him. You won't see that today. You really won't. People sometimes, but many times, people of power surround themselves by yes men. Not always. Stars, celebrities, and then they get entitled and they say, I just don't know what happened. You can watch it. You can watch a documentary on Elliot Spitzer, Client Number 9. It's an excellent documentary on his fall from grace. I don't know how this happened to me, because where they are in the moment makes no sense given where they started, but makes perfect sense if you watch that arc of leadership where they get to a certain point and they start believing their own PR and they let go of every value that was important to them. This isn't only leaders. This is us. This is us. You know, they have a great cartoon in The New Yorker. It's a kid who comes in carrying a trophy that's bigger than himself and says, look, Dad, we lost. That's us. We tell ourselves we're wonderful. We tell our kids they're wonderful. It's like the world's not such a great place, but you are wonderful. You can do anything you want. You can be anything you want. None of it's true. And let me tell you, this millennial population is entering the workplace. There's a lot of research on that, and a lot of books on the millennial population in the workplace, because you can't make a champagne breakfast every day and give a gold sticker to someone who's 25. Someone who feels entitled. I need to feel great about what I do. I need to be promoted. The fact that someone else has been here for 5 or 10 years doesn't make a difference. I want to see myself in that position. And we create the situation that Izebel right there very honestly says, do you not govern Israel? You can do whatever you want. What did Mel Brooks say? It's good to be the king. Right? If you're the king, you can have anything you want. But the fact is, you can have anything you want. Perception is that you can have anything you want without thinking that you're going to have an impact, a huge moral impact on the fiber of the society in which you lead. And that's where we are now. And that's not to say that there aren't some wonderful, very committed, dedicated leaders. We go back to the Mashal of Yotam, and we go back to the statements in Bamidbar. It is very, very hard to lead in chaos, to lead when change is the only stable factor in a life. And now you say, who goes into leadership roles? The good people say, I don't want to give up my fruit. I don't want to give up my wine. I don't want to give up my oil. I don't want to be someone that no one likes. And then who takes leadership positions? People who do not embody sincerity, civility, and integrity. I just want to close with one thought, and then I'll open up for questions. So in Sefer Devarim, when Moshe dies, and remember the two things that Moshe retains when he dies? There's two things that he goes, it's almost as if he goes as a living being. Okay. It says, Moshe ben Me'ah v'esrim shana v'moto, he was 120 years when he died. And it says, Lo kato eno v'lo nas lecho. His vision was undimmed and his strength was unabated. If you look carefully in Tanakh, good leadership begins with 20/20 vision. And you'll see Moshe, if you look at the early narratives of Moshe, he's constantly looking at things that other people don't want to look at. They don't want to look at injustice between a taskmaster and a slave. They don't want to look at the fighting that goes on between two slaves. They don't want to look at a burning bush. God looks at Moshe looking at the bush and says, it's you. You looked. You have the capacity for wonder. You're not afraid to look at something you don't understand to try to understand it. Moshe had vision. And he had strength. Lo nas kochov. His strength was unabated. And I actually think that this is a Yerusha, that what he left us, even as he left this world, was he left us with the qualities that define good leadership. Vision and strength. And we'll end there. Thank you.
I told you you're in for a great evening. Dr. Brown also solved a question that I've been thinking about. How did I become chairman of the board of the great Synagogue? And then on her website, I found a great line. When trouble arises and things look bad, there's always one individual who perceives a solution and is willing to take command. Very often, that person is crazy. And if I forget that, my wife reminds me. We'll take questions. Back there.
Yes, sir.
Thank you for your words. What you described is a model that sounds very similar to the idea of the rabbis making the Talmid Chacham the elite member of society. Can you respond to that?
What's the question?
To the rabbis, I'm very much steeped in tradition, so I'm not opposed to the rabbis. But it seems like the rabbis, who were very critical of the Kohanim for giving themselves an elevated status, have also built into the idea of serious lamdanut of Judaism also as putting themselves up on the pedestal. That is, that they've defined, and so we as their give this incredible kavod that, apparently what you've said tonight, would allow the rabbis to start to believe that about themselves.
Right. Okay, so that's a big question, is, perception of self within the rabbinic community and how that impacts on leadership. And what happens if there's kind of an infallibility doctrine, right? You can do no wrong. So I want to start off with a perception question. We have a Gemara Brachot that talks about what Talmidei Chachamim, where they should be seen and where they should not be seen, right? And what kind of clothing they should wear and what kind of clothing they shouldn't wear. So you could say, well, that was a question of kind of the egoistic self, or you can say they had an understanding that when you're a leader, you're watched by everybody, and you have to be careful about who you socialize with and what you say, and the way in which you say it, and the way in which you dress, because all those things make a difference. And I think from a perception standpoint, that's called role modeling, right? And I think that's very important, and they had a consciousness about that 2,000 years ago. In terms of the doctrine of infallibility, only the Catholic Church has that. And actually, I have to tell you, when I was writing my book on scandal, I was struggling with the title, and I figured, oh, there's got to be so many titles in the Catholic Church on abuse. So I know I will take one and Judaize it, right? This was my, and I looked and I looked and I looked. Thousands of books on Amazon, and I couldn't find a one. How could it not be that someone was writing about scandal in the Catholic Church? How could you not write about it? So actually, I did find one this year, unfortunately after the book was published, called Supreme Authority. And what the author does is try to analyze the mechanisms in the church that allow leaders in positions of authority to not take into account what the laity thinks, what the laity needs, and also to create that distance, that merchak, that allows the kind of crimes and the need to protect people. I have to say, having written and participated in various settings where rabbis are involved in scandal, thank God it's not anywhere near the same degree. So we have to make that distinction because it's important. The fact is that rabbis also believe their PR, that unfortunately Talmidim don't often say, give criticism for all kinds of understandable reasons, but then you have a responsibility to create a feedback loop. And unfortunately, I'll hear people say, well, we can't talk about this scandal, we can't be transparent about it because it will hurt the rabbinate. This isn't about hurting the rabbinate, it's about hurting the reputation of the Jewish people. It's about hurting individual Jews who become victims of scandal. So I think that your question is very, very fair and nuanced, and I don't think it's easy. I think actually it's the responsibility of the rabbi to create the feedback loop to make sure that he understands that he answers to people. I have to tell you my work. I work largely outside of the Orthodox community, and I work with a number of synagogues. And it's interesting that outside of the Orthodox community, most rabbis have annual performance reviews, just like everybody else. Just like everybody else. And if you say in an Orthodox synagogue to a board, would you think about doing an annual performance review if you're a rabbi? Just as a healthy way for your rabbi to get regular annual feedback, oh, a rabbi would never allow that. And then you get situations where people have a crisis of a sexual nature, of a financial nature, of another nature, and they simply don't have the language or the form or the structure to address it. So I thank you for your question. Yes, sir.
I think even broader than the issue of rabbis or official advisors.
Nice and loud. Oh, let's wait for the mic.
The way that God made the world, it seems that most people naturally look on their parents as God. Because they're the ones who take care of all their problems, and they have to trust them. What happens is there's no mechanism to make the child also be able to be critical of the parent and discover indeed if he or she is in a situation of giving their child a bad environment, ineffective family, call it whatever you will. So how would you deal with that basic human problem?
Well, again, we grew up and we're raised in hierarchical situations, and the family is one of them. Hopefully adult children have a degree of openness with parents that's different. But on the other hand, I'm brought back, again, as a teacher of Tanakh, I'm brought back to a particular moment where Eli, in Perek Bet of Shmuel Aleph, where Eli is told, your sons are scandalous. Your sons are scandalous. And he only hears about this as an old man. And you wonder to yourself, where were you all of those years? How did you not give the proper hadracha? Because your sons weren't only sons, they were assuming leadership positions in the Jewish community. Now actually, when you look at Tanakh, what you see is that we have multiple models of leadership. We have the Navi, we have the prophet, we have the Melech, we have the priest, we have the Shofet. We have different models of leadership because not every model works at any particular time. And because God continuously, through the avenue, through the mechanism of the prophet, says this model of leadership is corrupt. We have to change now. So that's actually another interesting point about leadership. And I say that because I want to tie it in a little bit to the book In the Narrow Places. Because I actually, in writing, what the book is an essay for every day of the 3 weeks on Tanakh. And it really came out of my own need, writing them, because for me, the 3 weeks should be a very thoughtful time, a time of spiritual growth, a time to think about memory and loss and destruction. But it wasn't really. It was, should I turn on the radio? Shouldn't I? Oh, I wish I could go to this movie, but I can't. It was about the restrictions. It wasn't about the spiritual process that we should undergo in thinking about what a korban is. And so in the process, I felt so well acquainted with certain Nevi'im, Yeshayahu and Yirmiyahu in particular. And I really felt, A.J. Heschel has a wonderful introduction to his book, The Prophets, called What Manner of Man is the Prophet. He says the Navi is someone who is lopsided. He has eyes that are so big because they see things other people don't want to see. He has ears that are so big because they're attuned to things that other people don't want to hear. And I felt that in writing the book and working on it, I want to say something also that probably came out of the experience of speaking about speaking about scandal this past year very uncomfortably, is that I included a little kavanah in each essay because I felt that people need life homework. It's not enough to read something. You read something and you say, how am I going to be a different person as a result of learning this? So that's the kind of spiritual exercise. I call it life homework. I think a lot about it. That we need to move not from text, but from text to life. That's what it means to be an observant Jew. That's what it means to live a Jewishly enriched life of values, is to say, these aren't only texts. This is a manual, a moral manual for my life. And so we need to make that transition. I thought the 3 weeks is a good time to do that. All right, another question. Yes?
Yeah, I've heard it said that we get the leaders that we deserve, which doesn't really make one feel that, confident. And it's a two-pronged question, okay? So basically, what I'm thinking is that not only do we get the leaders that we deserve, but the leaders at the top, I'm not speaking political, are really what's going to preempt the Mashiach coming or not. So we all need to be a beacon to another Jew, as you know, can you answer? Do you understand what I'm trying to ask you? Do you understand what?
I teach, but I don't read minds. I would like to, believe me. It would be great with my kids.
I'd like you to clarify.
Just talk into the mic, please.
Sorry, I'd like you to clarify how it's from the bottom up for every Jew to be a beacon, and from the top down.
Yeah, okay, all right. So actually, in terms of, are we responsible? I mean, you started with, I think, a beautiful and apt statement that we hear often is that we get the leaders we deserve. And I think that was the Mashal of Yotam was basically telling us, you get the leaders you deserve, so you get the bramble, because that's who you are. And I want to take a moment, because the question allows me to segue into, what does it mean to be a good follower? We are very difficult people to lead. I don't know if you want Moshe's job. You can imagine this whole long list of criteria, and on the bottom, remuneration, none. So the idea of really having the capacity to lead, and the patience to lead, and the intelligence to lead, and the goodness to lead is very problematic, and it's getting harder in many ways than it's getting easier. And I say this because I brought up the example of how negative people are. We don't always realize that our negativity makes good leaders say, I don't want this job. I know, personally, president of a day school in America who does not go to shul anymore. He doesn't go to shul on Shabbos because people attack him in shul. I know professionals, Jewish communal professionals, who have left their jobs because people attack them. And they say, I'm not getting paid well. I went into this because of the love of my people, and they're not so lovely. They're not so lovely right now. So my first book I wrote on leadership, I realized in teaching years and years of people in leadership positions that this issue of negativity was so prominent that although I didn't include it in the curriculum, we couldn't not talk about it. And so I devised a list of questions, basically how to manage difficult people. Not that I have any formula, believe me, but the idea of asking yourself certain questions. How many minutes, add them up, have you spent talking and dealing with this person? Add them up and ask, have you made any change in the way that person thinks as a leader? Have you Have you changed the culture that person operates in so that person can be respectful and use language in a particular way? And I'm going to tell you a story, and it's extreme, but it says a lot about fellowship in answer to your question there. I was teaching a group of Jewish criminal professionals in DC. We have a course, and we've had about 500 people go through the course in leadership. And we do lay leaders, and we do volunteer leaders, and we do professionals. So a woman says, we're talking about this particular issue. She's a camp director of a wonderful camp. And a woman, a week before camp starts, calls up because the bus route for her child has been changed. And a new counselor, who's a college student, answers the phone. And she says, why did you change my kid's bus route? This woman has no idea. So I'm so sorry. She says, I want to know what the new bus route is right now. So she tries to find the bus route, and she's not successful. She comes back, maybe a little too late for the call, says, I'm sorry, I haven't found that information, but I'll get it to you. And the woman spews a string of explicatives at her and says, why, should I send my kid to this camp? You don't have your act together, you don't know where, right? And the woman said, I'm so sorry, and she hung up the phone. So this is the camp director in the class. So I said, so what did you do? She said, this young woman, it was a week before camp started, said, I don't want to work here. Crying. How do we respond to a woman like this? And the camp director said, well, I called her back, and I said, here's the information you need for your daughter's bus route. And I said, and she said, and then I said goodbye. I said, and what you should have said was, we want to create a nurturing environment for your child, because that's the kind of camp we are, and that's why you're sending your kid here. And a nurturing environment is a partnership between campers and counselors and parents. So we'd really appreciate if you could use different language with our counselors, because they're here to help your kids feel nurtured. We had that conversation, and that's just an example. But I have to tell you, I spoke at a professional conference 2 years ago, 250 people in the room, and I asked, how many of you have experienced, by show of hands, a gratuitously hostile conversation in your leadership from a lay leader? And every single person, except one, raised a hand. And we made him stand up. His name is Bruce, and we all clapped for him. And I tell you that because these are extremes, but these are cultures where you say, I don't really want to partner with you when you talk to me that way. I don't want to partner with you. Now, what happens to us as followers? We actually betray our best selves as followers, and then the good leaders say, I'll go elsewhere. So in terms of being a shining light, every time you have a positive interaction with a leader, every time you say, you know what, I'm going to show my gratitude. Thank you so much for this service. Thank you so much for what you do for my kids. Thank you for teaching my kid this year. Okay, no problems, but thank you. I appreciate what you do and who you are and why you lead a mission-driven life. Why you're volunteering in this organization. It changes things for people. And sometimes people will say, you're the only person who's ever said thank you. All right, one more question. Yes? Two boys and two girls.
Just wait, can I have them?
Wait, here's the microphone.
How do you deal with leaders who are rabbis, people or parents, people who were taught we are taught to look at with, or relate with kavod. There's a whole body of halakha about how you have to respect parents and rabbeim, and not talking about lay people, but people that you have to respect. And how do you deal with that when there's a problem with their leadership?
I think really that was the first question, if you don't mind my saying those. I think that was related to the first question about whether leaders are infallible. And, again, you don't want to diminish from the kavod of a leader, but you want leaders to be open enough to create feedback loops so that they can hear and understand what they're doing, and mechanisms where certain people can speak and make sure that people get the advice that they need.
How do you do that?
Well, again, that's a technical question, as we could sit and talk about how you set up those frameworks. Part of it, by the way, is that institutions also have to have ethical guidance structures. If you had in your institution a major ethical crisis, would your institution have the mechanisms to handle it? Virtually every denomination in Judaism now in the United States, and you can look online and get this, have structures that are there that you can look at for practical advice about how to help create those kinds of frameworks.
The New York Times In doing a review on Dr. Brown, he said, she is one of the leading Jewish thinkers in America today. She confirmed that by her presentation tonight. Her book, Our Places, which is a marvelous book, and so appropriate for this time of the year, is available to be bought right to my left. Erica will be happy to autograph the book for you. Thank you for coming. Erica, thank you for schlepping here from Silver Springs. The Seattle on the way. Remember to turn on your telephones. And see you at the next event. Lila. Be careful going home.
Is that okay? Your family?
Yeah, brother.
Oh, really?
She was great. Glassman, I come to the clinic.
Oh, that's right, that's right.
Dr. Burton is working on me now.
That's right, you should quit. How are you related?
My daughter.
It's your daughter?
Daughter, sister.
That's nice. That's really nice. Oh, okay.
Are you going to wait for Erica, right? I'm going to take a taxi down. Yeah, sure.
So, I must get you a copy. Do you have a, how do I get you a copy? Do you have
Spoonmaker. Spoonmaker.
Okay. Monday I won't be there, but I'll try to leave a copy.
You did work on me, Dr. Glass.
That's right, that's right.
Dr. Glassman from the clinic.
Dental.
Dental. There, I got to go see more. Terrific. Get us a book. Bring us some. Bring some book. Bring some book. Okay, ma. Hold to. We'll see you. She has to stay here a while. I have to go.
I'll just do this over here.
Get a.
But I thought they were you were at home. We met yesterday.
Going?
Thank you for that.
Yes. 20 cents.
There you go.
Marry it.
Matthew left.
I call him as a friend.
See you tomorrow. Shabbat shalom. Good luck.
Was there a wedding? A couple days ago.
You know, I did talk to him. I love him.
Thank you. Very nice. I'm heading out. Bye. Thanks so much for running.
Okay. You must be very proud. That's wonderful.
It's fine with me.
It's wonderful. It was a wonderful talk tonight. It really was.
I tell two friends that we have a private problem. She her problem is this.
Okay.
All our kids. You have 3.